Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank you all for coming, for joining us. We at the Tech Collective, we are the IT Industry Association for the state of Rhode Island. So we're thrilled to bring you programming such high level as Rob will provide for us today on a holistic data strategy, answering tomorrow's questions. Rob Ulmschneider is the Director of Business Intelligence Solutions for Trilix. And I love, like, he considers himself, he's a self-described data evangelist. I love the descriptor, and having had the pleasure of hearing him speak a few times, I am not a data person, but I could totally become a data junkie. So if this is your first time hearing Rob, I hope that you will enjoy his presentation as much as I have in the past and will today, I'm sure. So I will hand over the reins to you, Rob. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Monica. And indeed, I'm hoping that what we're going to talk about today, this is an important topic for business leaders as well as for data practitioners. So I'm hoping to sort of speak both languages today. I don't want to get too technical, but it's important to have some foundation in the technical elements as well. So thank you, everyone, for coming, and to Tech Collective for hosting this. I think this is a very timely topic. As we start to recover from COVID-19, we're really going to have to look at how we do business differently. And so across the organization, we're going to be reevaluating strategy, not just as far as data is concerned, but data is going to be a part of a lot of those conversations. So when I talk about a holistic data strategy, what I mean is for any data strategy to be successful, you really have to have elements, you have to blend the elements of technical requirements as well as the business context. So you're going to hear me come back to that point a lot, but I think it's really important. So anyway, how I want to start off today is you should be able to access our chat feature and hopefully type some questions to me. I'd like for you to just think about some burning questions that you're asking in your business today, and feel free to just enter them right in the chat. These could be specific questions, open-ended ones, things that you think data can help answer, things that you think it can't help answer. I know that some of the questions that we've been hearing is, how do I measure the productivity of my employees now that they're working remotely? How do I cut costs because revenue's down? How do I do that in a way that is going to minimize the long-term impacts? So take a moment and just let me know if there are any questions that along those lines that have come up for you recently. I don't really see any from the audience right now, but if things do come up, feel free to post them. But a lot of the questions that, and if you look at the two examples that I raised, these are questions that we didn't even really consider asking 3 or 4 months ago. I'm not going to tell you that if you go back in time a year or 6 months, that if you had a data ecosystem in place and a strong data strategy, that you would have been able to predict a global pandemic and the economic aspects of that as well. But the point of handling data strategically, and the point of having a data ecosystem, is to be more flexible, to be more nimble, and to be able to ask the questions and answer the questions that you haven't even thought of yet, okay? So, the questions that you have today, the ones that I raised before, maybe any that are on your minds right now, those can be handled with a side data project. What you really want is this decision-making environment that really gives you a leg up on the business decisions that you're going to have to make tomorrow and a month from now and 6 months from now. So I want to talk a little bit about our approach to putting together a data strategy. And really what it is it's a roadmap that looks at where you are right now, determines what your ideal future state should be, and charts a course for getting you from point A to point B. So this is at the bottom of the slide here, you can see a screen snip from a data strategy roadmap that we put together at one point. You'll notice that a perfect score is not necessarily what you want. It might be your case, depending on your specific business context. We might not need to deploy a lot of technology for you. It might just come down to refining some processes, maybe measuring some different things, maybe building different dashboards with the tools that you already have. So we have a current state score, an ideal future score, and a gap. And the roadmap provides recommendations for how to get you from where you are now to where you really ought to be. Now at Trilix, we have this as our data strategy model, and it's in 5 dimensions. And again, what I'm going to come back to is I'm going to talk about each of these dimensions as we go through today's presentation. But if you're going to take away one thing from what I'm talking about today, you need to merge the business with the technology. You need to have input from both sides. There's a tendency sometimes for executive management to say, we need to be doing more with data and to push that project onto your IT people. And they're gonna go out there, they're gonna find best of breed solutions. They're gonna have a well-integrated system with state-of-the-art technology. But is it answering the questions that you need to answer? Is it, do they have the business case in place so that's really providing value for the people that are using it? On the other hand, if you leave that responsibility up to the business side, what kind of expectations are you setting? Because some of these projects take 2 months and some of them take 20 months. So you really need that input from the start as well, so that you can see, what are the underlying concerns? Can we even answer the questions right now that we want to ask? Is our data clean enough to really proceed? So it really involves communication and collaboration between those two sides. So like I said, I'm going to go over each of the dimensions here. And it starts with, at the foundation on the business side, your corporate strategy and business objectives. I find that this is what we spend the largest portion of our time focused on. And the reason for that is, if you just look at the other 4 dimensions, there's not a lot of different, it basically becomes a best practices white paper, right? But it's your approach to business and the things that you're looking to achieve that are going to dictate what tools we deploy, the things that we measure, and how we build out your data ecosystem. So I'll give you an example of a couple of cases that we looked at recently. Actually very similar strategies, but with some nuance. And it led us to a different focus in terms of what our recommendations were in the roadmap. So we had a couple of growing organizations. Each of them did a data strategy roadmap with us. And they both were at a point where they were seeing diminishing returns in their current market. And one organization had a strategy to basically take their processes and package them as a franchise model and sell them to other players in the same space that might be looking to model their business after this company. Now the other organization was facing the same issue, and they decided that they wanted to expand through acquisition. We just want to go into other markets and take over companies that are operating in the same space. Now, for the company that was focused on franchising, a focus of the recommendations of our roadmap was just tightening up your processes, making sure that you have good policies in place, making sure that it's scalable, because at their current size, their approach to data worked, but it wasn't going to scale to a larger operation. It wasn't something that was necessarily replicable. But for the company that was more interested in acquisition, we talked about starting with a market assessment to find out where we should be, what specific markets we should be targeting. So 2 data-driven approaches for similar strategies, but the difference between those strategies led us down different paths. Now, on the technical side, the foundation is in your source data and applications, okay? So before we even start a meeting with somebody that wants to do a data strategy roadmap, we actually send them a survey and where we ask them to list all of the data producing applications, really all of the data sources in their organization. So, this is the obvious ones like CRM, ERP, all the social media platforms that they use. Do they use, say, Google Analytics on their website? Do they use any SEO tools? And it's also, look, no judgment, but if you're starting a data strategy, you probably still have a lot of data that's just living in spreadsheets and it's siloed in individual groups. So we want to know about those two, because we want to see, should that be brought into a proper application? Or at the very least, are we able to access, is the data clean? Are we able to access it on a regular basis so that we can ingest it into the data ecosystem? Now, the survey that we give them looks at all those applications, and we want to know the purpose of each of them, the different roles in the business, who's the administrator of it, who has access just to read the information in it, and who can manipulate it as well. We look at the standard reports that those applications offer. Can we get to the raw data? Is there an API that we can connect to? Or is there at least a raw data extract that we can pull at regular intervals? How can we access that? What are the security concerns? And are there any regulatory or compliance concerns? So for each application and data source in your organization, we want to know that level of detail to establish where you are now in terms of your software blend. Then I want to talk about what we call non-technical infrastructure. This is pretty broad, and I would say it's probably the most esoteric out of any of the dimensions that we're going to talk about today. But this is basically the people, process, policies, and culture in your organization that might have an impact on how you use data. So oftentimes when I ask a client, what are the policies that you have that might have an impact on data? And they think, well, we really don't have any sort of data governance framework right now, data governance policies. Well, that doesn't mean you don't have policies that don't have an impact on what we're talking about, right? Most organizations are going to have onboarding and offboarding procedures. If we're going to start to introduce new technologies, we need to know about that. In many cases, organizations are going to have policies on sharing personal information. And if you don't have policies, you at least probably have some unwritten best practices. This is especially important in healthcare, of course, with patient privacy. I come from a retail banking background, and it was very important there to protect our customers' personal information, their financial information as well. So this needs to be considered. And then on the other side, which makes sense as a mirror to the non-technical infrastructure, we have technical infrastructure. So this is going to be, and I want to differentiate this from the source data and applications keys, because this is the components that are tasked with moving data through your organization, not just creating data, but moving it around. So this is integration between applications. This is how you extract, transform, and load data from those applications into some sort of appliance for analytical processing, such as a data warehouse or a data lake. Going back to security and access concerns, if there are certain segments of your data that certain people shouldn't have access to, you might need to establish data marts, which are these views of only a certain subset of the information in your organization. And at the tail end of that pipeline is your BI platforms. This is what most people think of when they think of business intelligence. They think of Tableau or Power BI. How are you actually communicating? What technology are you using to communicate this data and the insights to your business users? And then finally, at the top of that pyramid that I showed you before, this is where business and technology converge. And I call this leveraging insights for actionable results. So what this means is, I'd like to use an analogy you see on the screen, the inside of a car. I like to use an analogy for the various layers of BI maturity that companies can have. So for the longest time, I think for decades and decades, if you liken it to driving a car, the way we were running our business from a data perspective is we were just driving blindfolded, essentially. Or to give perhaps a Rhode Island spin on it, those mornings that you didn't expect to be frosty, and you get outside, and some of us are guilty of this from time to time. We might have scraped a little 2-inch square in the windshield so that we can see out on the way into work. That's the type of view that we had before. And so, good business leaders who were making decisions, 40 years ago, they relied on gut. And when you're driving and relying on gut, I'm going to say, sometimes if you're taking a route that you've taken, you have the experience with that route that you've taken before, you might be able to get to your destination, but most of the times that's not going to be sufficient. So the next level of maturity, where I think most organizations at a minimum find themselves, is being able to use their rearview mirror. Okay, so they can see what happened before. They can see what their revenue was last quarter, but they're not looking forward. So this is sort of the definition of answering today's questions. When you have a data strategy and you're leveraging insights for actionable results, at a minimum, your baseline should be the third level of maturity, which is you can see out your windshield, you can see, in the case of a car, you can literally see your dashboard, but you probably have some dashboards deployed, right? And you can use your side mirrors, you're driving safely at this point. But what are some things that leaves out? You can't see if there's an accident ahead beyond the bend. You don't know what's coming up that isn't typical on your commute. And so that fourth level of BI maturity, where we really do want to strive for, is all of the things that you have plus GPS, right? The GPS is going to tell you, hey, indeed, there is some traffic backed up ahead, and I'm going to tell you that you can turn right here before you get into that, because once you get there, it's going to be too late. So I want to think of leveraging insights for actionable results. I want to think about that in the context of these foundational elements. So when you think about strategy, how does that roll up? This is when we start talking about KPIs, the specific things that you're measuring, okay? And think about that GPS analogy. A lot of people know their KPIs, but they have lagging indicators. They know how to measure what happened last month and last quarter. And that's great, and that's important. You do need that. But if you can see where things are trending if you look at the last 4 or 5 quarters, but if things are starting to downturn and you're in the middle of a quarter, you want to be able to course correct before that becomes a significant problem. So when we look at KPIs, we look for leading indicators, and the best leading indicators are going to look at your behaviors. They're going to look at the activities that are driving those results that are the lagging indicators. So that's a big part of it. With your source data and applications, now we want to talk about how your people are using it. Are they fully trained? Are you getting the most out of the software that you're using right now? I can't tell you how many times I've talked to somebody who has just finished up an implementation. It delivered probably 50% of what was promised, and now they're going to have to layer something on top of that. Is that really necessary, or do we need to just get more out of that application that you just deployed? On the technical infrastructure side, we're really going to lean hard on that BI platform that you're using, Tableau or Power BI, and we really want to try to focus on self-service analytics. So can we get a lot of the work of asking questions into the hands of the business users, not just developing reports on demand to answer a single question, but developing data sets that they can easily use, manipulate, drill into to answer questions that we didn't think of when we were specifying that initial report. And then on the non-technical infrastructure side, we talk a little bit about data governance, rolls up to the top of this pyramid. But what you also want to consider is your decision-making framework. You know, you have all this data, and it's in the best format, and it's accurate, and it's a single version of the truth across the enterprise. How are you now using it to make decisions? Does it have a seat at the table every time something comes up that the data can have an impact on? And so that's a very important thing to consider now that you have your ecosystem in place. So that is our approach to building a data strategy. And, you know, like as I just want to keep hammering home, it's really important to have that contribution from both sides. It's not a technology project. It can't be just delegated to IT personnel. There's a number of statistics out there about the rate of success and the rate of failure of business intelligence projects. On the optimistic side, it's 70%, and I've seen it as high as 90% failure rate. Okay, part of that is because of poor planning, but even the best planning needs to have the right people in the room, influencing the conversation and helping to guide those decisions. So before I turn it over for any questions that folks might have, I just want to point you to this. You know, at Trilix, we do help with data strategy. The roadmap that follows that sort of pyramid that you saw before. You can find more information at this link or by scanning this QR code. There's also a case study there for a recent data strategy roadmap that we put together that talks about the real tangible business aspects of looking at your data more strategically. And so that's about all that I have. I'm happy to answer to turn it over to Monica and open up the conversation for questions.
I know earlier Joan had posted, seems like there's more to do today with respect to data. In these economic times, are there strategies for affording a new data strategy? Or do you think there will be savings that offset such investment?
So it's hard to quantify at the outset a numerical value for the savings that you're going to get out of a data ecosystem. But I think it's a necessary expense to at the very least be looking at data while you're making these big strategic pivots, because in the times that we're in now, that's what businesses need to do. The strategy that you put together late last year did not anticipate a global pandemic and the impacts of that. And so we need to take another look at data. And indeed, we need to take a look at our underlying assumptions. If you're doing advanced analytics and you have some assumptions built into your algorithms, those assumptions might have been turned on their head, because they've been trained with data from pre-pandemic, and we're in a different situation now. So we need to look at that differently. So it's one of those things that's a necessity, but I'll tell you, if you are implementing a data strategy correctly, there is always a way to put it in dollars, to put it into a dollars saved in terms of real business outcomes.
Sorry. Julie had written, how do you communicate with a client who has a portion of data that is siloed? Proceed or pull the plug?
Well, the first thing that I would ask in that situation, I would look for why that's siloed, because perhaps there's a legitimate reason, okay? But the legitimate reason is usually a security issue. There are plenty of illegitimate reasons to have data siloed. A lot of times that's just how these organizations operate. It's my data. I own it. I don't want to share it with the other teams. That's not healthy. But if it's a concern of, I'll take my financial background again, the regulatory compliance team has data that they can't share with the rest of the organization. They track things about how their employees, transaction activity, they track that stuff so they can look for instances of fraud. So that stuff can't be incorporated into the data ecosystem. But if it can be, then we need to look at how we can break down that silo. So spread marts, which is sort of a fun word for just a database that's built in a spreadsheet out of convenience. Can we pull that into a proper application? Can we take your list of customer leads and throw it into a CRM? That's a good first start. People don't really think about that as a business intelligence project. They think about it as a technology project. But it's one of those underlying things. It's almost like a prerequisite, and so that's why it becomes part of the discussion that we end up having here. Monica, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, very quiet group today. No other questions that we have. I guess everyone already has the windshield completely clean, the back mirrors going. This is all good. Anyone else with a question while we have Rob here and fully attentive? Do you foresee any new type of KPIs due to the pandemic? Excuse me.
Yeah, so it's some of the things that I talked about at the outset. Nobody thought, I shouldn't say nobody, but there are plenty of businesses that were 0% remote 4 or 5 months ago, and now they're 100% remote. And for the time being, I think that in the very least, that number is going to be somewhere between 0 and 100%. And so one of the things that you want to measure is to measure productivity. And there's a lot of strategies that you can deploy there. But again, I want to talk about assumptions as far as that's concerned. This is something that can benefit the business long term. If you're able to have people work remotely and to still be productive, you're going to attract a larger field of talent. What I worry is that the measures that people are coming up with do not take into account the sort of confounding variable, which is there's a lot of things that are distracting us right now that would distract us whether we're in the office or working from home. So I think that's going to sort of level out, but that's one. And I think another is, businesses that are just pivoting into different models. You think of the restaurants that are doing takeout. Hopefully they're collecting data on that because to see if this is a viable business model going forward. Look at Tech Collective, for example. 4 months ago, this is something that might have been a longer presentation that we have at their facilities in Providence. But, you know, with the reality that we're in right now, they're doing a lot of, virtual events, and they're able to do a lot more of them. And in some cases, they're able to have greater reach. So that's something that needs to be looked at. And, you know, that is basically a new measure for them that they weren't having before. What's the effectiveness of our virtual events? So it just comes down to, you know, how is your business model changed? That's going to influence how what you measure changes.
And Kyle had asked, any thoughts to share on migrating from on-premise servers to the cloud?
Sure. So you know, that's some I always definitely ask when we're looking over source data and applications where things are hosted. And while I'm not necessarily in, you know, that space, the sort of IT hardware services space, I know that's tremendously more easy, cost effective, safe to have a lot of this stuff in the cloud. And so if they're doing things anyway, you know, that's something that we take a look at. Recently, I worked with a client on a Qlik upgrade. They were using Qlik, by the way, if you're not familiar, is a BI application similar to Tableau and Power BI, but they were using QlikView. QlikView is an ancient version of Qlik. I think it actually predates, it definitely predates Power BI. I think it even predates Tableau. Qlik Sense, we upgraded to for a number of reasons, but part of it, as I said, is if you ever want to move from on-prem to cloud, you're going to need to go to Qlik Sense anyway. So this is a good, you know, thing to have. I know that they were considering it, and it may eventually be where they go. So yeah, it definitely has an impact when we look at on the technical side.
And then we have Julie had asked, if you have time to tell a story, what is the most unexpected issue you encountered in a discovery session? Without naming names, I suppose, right?
Yeah, I have to withhold names for sure. I was working with a business that was around. I'm trying to be coy here. They were around for a very long time. I'm talking. They were a SaaS business that had been around for decades. And there aren't a lot of decades for SaaS to be around. Like they were around since the mid-90s, and at a sort of constant pace of growth, but never much higher than that. A healthy rate of growth, but you know, still very much acting like a startup. And when we talked about the corporate strategy and business objectives, not only did they not have one after being in business for 20 years, but they almost didn't really know what went into one. So the conversation pivoted less to a talk about their data strategy towards a talk on how to build a corporate strategy. And while I'm not amazed in some cases to have that conversation, certainly if you are, you know, let's say a 10 or less person company, maybe you've only been in business for 3 years, it's one of the things that you don't necessarily think about right out of the gate. But to have been in business successful for 20 years and really not to have a strategy, you know, and we're talking about the point where they become at that point like a 60-person operation. That was just amazing to me. So I ended up, that conversation pivoted somewhere that I didn't think it was going to go. But a lot of our recommendations were in the sort of this zone, the corporate strategy and business objective zone. But I mean, I think, you know, aside from my shock about that, it just goes back to when you're having these conversations, you need to be nimble because you don't know where they're going to go. You don't know if you're going to lean more on the business side because there's some prerequisites that you think might be there that aren't.
Imagine where they could have been if they had had a strategy the whole time.
Yeah, I'll say I think it's a testament to, you know, a strong work ethic there. I mean, they did have a great culture. I'll say that, but just it was an afterthought, and whatever.
Right. That was a good question. Thank you kindly for Julie for asking. So it was kind of fun to go off a little bit. I will mention to this group this afternoon at 4 p.m. The Tech Collective is working to host a town hall meeting all about COVID testing. So it's kind of the whys, the hows. It's two of preeminent doctors in this field that will be talking about the who, the why should we, what does it show, what doesn't it show, should we be tested at work, should we not be tested. It should be a great discussion and lots of good information coming forth from that. So I did post that link in the chat as well in case you are interested if you have not yet registered. And I'd really like to thank Rob once again. This was an incredible presentation. Thank you kindly. I hear the applause coming through if we weren't all muted. But yeah, thank you so much, Rob, for your time that you put together for getting this great presentation all there, and the thoughtfulness as well to knowing that your audience can be pretty varied and you need to hit a lot of marks with it. So thank you very much.
Monica, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but do you have information on the data event next week? The data ethics.
Sure. Oh, the pressure. I'll put it back over to Creosa, who could probably share with us a little bit of detail there. Any pressure? No? No?
Yeah, thank you for that transition. It was great. Thank you for putting on a spot. I think, so our event next week is on Thursday. We at Tech Collective are trying to build that data culture and create spaces for people to embrace data and learn. And we have the privilege to have some incredible, talented people in our data steering committee. And through them, we are able to build presentations as powerful as this one. And next Thursday, we have a presentation. I'm going to put the link for everybody to register.
Monica did.
I just did put the Eventbrite link. I figured it's hard to talk and find links at the same time.
Yes, thank you for that. So it's going to be data ethics as it relates to the COVID-19. It's going to be a very inspiring dialogue between John Peckin and Doug Freeman from Johnson & Johnson. I think that I encourage you to participate and attend, and I welcome a feedback. What would you like to see from our incredible data steering committee? Julie Blackburn is also in that steering committee, along with Rob and John Peckin as well, and many others. So thank you for that little pitch to that, Rob. I really appreciate it, and you would not regret participating, learning, and becoming part of our data community.
Thank you to all. Thank you, Creosa, for pitching in on that. I appreciate that. Good teamwork. We have good teamwork going on. And thank you again, Rob. I appreciate it. And to all of our participants today. I hope you enjoyed.
Everybody who attended. Yeah.
Hope you enjoyed. Have a wonderful afternoon.